Hello, and welcome to this special episode of Terminus. I am the black metal guy. The death metal guy couldn't make it. He is out with a chainsaw actively chopping down the biggest trees he can find in order to increase carbon emissions to guarantee that in the future his offspring will get to live in the cover of Suffocation's Effigy of the Forgotten. So I am here with Damian from Robes of Snow. How's it going, man?
Thanks for having me.
And I am also here with Charlie Aldersop of Moulderyawn. How you doing?
I'm currently not speaking to you based on what you just said.
Yeah. This podcast is over.
What the heck?
It's I figured we're doing the black metal tree interview, so I had to do the death metal apocalypse for the beginning. Oh man, so Aldersop, obviously a nom de guerre, which I assume has something to do with the alder.
Yes, and sops, exactly.
That sounds a bit like sap.
Yeah, have fun trying to figure out what it means.
All right, so both of you guys have in some way been around the Terminus co-prosperity sphere for quite a long time, since one of the first newer labels we started focusing on right when the show was beginning really was Old Mill, which has hosted both of you. So we'll talk about the Old Mill connection in a second, but yeah, you're both sort of joined by a focus on intensely nature-y stuff, a little bit distant from mainline ideas of black metal and inflected by other styles, and sort of joined by that, and you're sort of friends and collaborators, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. So before we get into that and the split that we just reviewed, let's talk about just real quick origin stuff. Damian, where did Robes of Snow come about? You started in 2020, as far as I can tell, as far as releasing stuff, and then you just put out a ton of shit. Had you been recording some of this earlier?
So there was a little bit of that, and I'd been doing music for a long time, nothing that really mattered, and I just decided, and it was actually perfectionism prevented me. For years I'd been working on music, but I would start something and wasn't able to finish it, and then eventually at a certain point I just had to figure my shit out, and I kind of came to the conclusion that I was going to make an album and I was going to create a deadline in my head, and I had originally intended on putting the Frozen Choir out first, but based on the season I found myself starting to write autumn themed songs, and then to me it just seemed to make sense to do that separate album, so I kind of rushed, and I threw that out there on a whim.
All right, nice. So your first official releases you're doing after quite a long time of training in the dojo, so to speak.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, excellent. And so for you, Charlie, how about you? It seems like your project is older.
It is, but I don't know if I have the background that Damian does. I sort of started in 2013. But when I say started, it was more like I was just messing around with shit at the time. I specifically started with GarageBand. I was messing around with the synths in there and stuff, and when I found the kind of synths that you hear and all the stuff that I have, that's what clicked in my head, and then I just kept running with that ball, basically.
So the band was formed around the synth palettes.
Yes, absolutely.
Interesting. And so does that mean I'm correct? Does that mean when I heard From Whence the Woods, which was re-released by Old Mill on tape in 2020, but has been around since 2016, when I first heard that last year and thought this literally sounds like it's been recorded on GarageBand, I was correct?
100%.
Well, and I say I know nothing about production. I of course have also fucked around with synth textures in GarageBand. So cool. Well, that is an interesting genesis for the project. So you were working with GarageBand, and Damian, you have a background as a sort of not just with metal, but with sort of traditional Americana kind of stuff, right? Folk music.
So that's right. So growing up, I was a metalhead kid and playing guitar, but I'd always been surrounded by other music, and in particular, I have an Aunt Liz and Uncle Fred, and they're both semi-professional bluegrass musicians. So, like my dad would take little metalhead Damian out into the mountains, and I'd go spend time with my family, and then like they would do all the things you're probably imagining in your head, like a bluegrass folks would do. We'd sit around in a circle by a campfire, and there'd be accordions and banjos and mandolins, and then out of the guitar, and then I kind of like picked up that influence from that. And so I'm sure you probably hear that to a certain extent in the Robes of Snow's more acoustic stuff.
Yeah, absolutely, because you use some like mandolin and hammer dulcimer and whatnot, right?
So I think the thing that you're hearing as a hammer dulcimer is probably a lyre harp, but close. Yeah.
What's a lyre harp? Wait, that sounds like it's called a harp. So I play the
harp.
Yeah.
So
like chai tea, because chai means tea.
Yeah. So like, have you ever seen a Vardruno video?
Of course.
So he's playing like that stringed instrument he plucks, like that his beard dangles around is a version of
like,
a lyre harp.
Like a taggle harp. Is that what it's called?
So it's like
is it different from a lyre, or is it the same thing and there's just a way that people call it in bluegrass? They say lyre harp.
So the I don't think a lyre harp is associated with bluegrass. That's just like an instrument that I was interested in.
So you just mean it's like a lyre?
Sure. As I understand, and like all the harpists out there listening to extreme metal podcasts, don't come for me. But like that there's different kinds of harps, and I know they have different kinds of classifications that I'm not entirely familiar with. So
no, for sure. I was just being medieval. Yeah. So yeah, you're actually playing harp on there as well as, and there is banjo, right?
So very sparsely. I have some other things coming up. In the future, way more. Yes, I can also play, and I do also play banjo.
All right, cool. So we'll come back to that sort of influences stuff in a bit, because that's super interesting. But just as far as more sort of situation, scene setting, and all that, how did both of you come into contact with Reese from Old Mill? Because that really, I mean, if you look at the, Old Mill has certainly probably got his start in part through Bandcamp, less so now, but you just look at the initial releases, and it's basically just like, these are the house bands of Old Mill.
Yeah.
So how about you first, Charlie?
So I've actually known Reese. I've known him for quite some time. Like maybe like 2018 is when me and him started like talking to each other on Instagram. And I think in 2019, actually, sorry, let me backtrack. In 2018, he was doing reviews of like metal albums and stuff on Sleeping Village Reviews. And in 2019, he started up his Zion, which was called Old Mill. And from there, he turned Old Mill into like what it is right now, like actually releasing tapes and stuff. And he asked me if From Whence the Woods would be the first tape, and I was like, fuck yeah. And there's like a whole reason like why I sort of chose him and didn't go with some other offers I had originally. And it's because like I think anyone that knows about Old Mill, they can say like this is some like handmade good quality shit. Like if you have one of his tapes, like they're amazing. Like he puts so much work into them, and like it blows my mind how good like all of the special edition bundles that he makes come out.
Oh yeah. So had he done a like an official release before? Sort of, did he show you something he'd already done, or was he just like, hey, I've got this crazy plan, and you were like, I trust you, bro?
Yes, he did.
Awesome.
It was like, let's put your tape out. I don't know if this is like just to get me hyped or whatever, but he told me, I made Old Mill to put your tape out. And I was like, okay, that's fucking cool.
That is awesome. Yeah, so you were the seed, Old Mill.
Yes.
And yeah, I've seen that zine. He sent me a copy of it back in the day on my first order. Like, there was already a fair amount of care that went into that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The classic Xerox sort of, staple spine zine, but a lot went into it. Cool. So, how about you, Damian?
So yeah, I mean, I was just on Instagram, and we had followed each other, and he sent me a message. Now, I'm very, like, I think I mentioned to you before we started recording, I'm not very well connected with the scene. So he messaged me, and he says that, like, he wanted to put a tape out, and I just assumed he was kidding. I was like, a tape? What the fuck are these Canadians on about? Like, a tape? Like, because I'm old enough from a time when tapes were out before, so I was like, obviously this guy's joking. And so I asked one of my friends who's kind of more and he spends less time in the woods and more time like making connections with people, and he was like, no, that's definitely a thing and you should do it. So I did it.
I would like to add that I'm also in your same boat, that when he mentioned a tape, I was like, what the fuck? But yeah.
So yeah, and so then I was like, sure, why not? And then there was a little. I'm being a little reductive. There was a little more to it but like, no, he basically just approached me and in particular attention to the folk stuff. I didn't like folk black metal, or the folk part wasn't necessarily a label. I was like, I just thought of my own music as atmospheric black metal. I didn't necessarily like probably understand the nuance along with that. But then like I started listening to other things that he liked and other artists, and then I sort of understood more then about what Old Mill was about, and then I was in support of that, and that's how we did Autumn Stag, and then everything else.
Yeah, well, yeah. Old Mill has a unique idea of what folk black metal might mean. So let's start talking about influences then, and then we'll move toward talking about the recent split. But so you called Robes of Snow atmospheric black metal. That, like folk black metal, is a term that often puts a bad taste in the mouth of people who like black metal. But your approach to it is, and it refers to, like, it can refer to a variety of different things, and it's meant different things over time.
Sure.
What would be your when you understood what you were doing in that way, what were your paradigms for it?
Like, a lot of people ask about the folk part or the folk influence, and certainly there's a lot of bands out there, that I've liked or that I've learned about since. I like about the folk part. I don't.
I meant about the atmospheric thing first, but you can start either way. I don't.
Okay. So then let me say that, like, yeah, I just thought, like, okay, well, when I take my classical guitar and I take my mandolin and I put a lot of reverb on it, it has atmosphere. So I just kind of, like, I guess there's a lot of other, like, bands that, like, are atmospheric folk black metal or whatever that I haven't heard recently. But, I was listening to, and have been listening to years for, like, Drudka and Olver and, things like that. And Panopticon, certainly. And I think, I remember hearing Panopticon and just being blown away by that. And some of my initial concern was, like, I have some family that are from the mountains, and there's a lot of coal mining history, and I was really worried that I was just going to clone Panopticon. So I spent some time to make sure that, like, I can incorporate some other influences and had a different sound that I wouldn't specifically just sound like a Panopticon ripoff. So I cultivated that by, listening to Drudka and Olver and, a lot of the other things I'd come across. I hope that answered your question.
Oh, yeah, very much so. So, like, Drudka and Olver would have been some of the bands where that term was first applied, atmospheric black metal was first applied to those bands.
Sure.
Before it came to mean more kind of post-rocky stuff.
Yeah, you and I need to talk about that later. But
yeah.
Yeah. How so? Or just, like, after the show?
No. So, I remember.
Here we go.
I remember to talk to like, I was talking to Charlie, and I was like, these motherfuckers call me post black metal. Like, it's a shame because I like the Terminus guys, but I guess the Harvest is going to be good next year because now I have to sacrifice these dudes called me a fucking wimp, and then I don't know if y'all remember for April Fools, there was the Metal Archives put. I was not aware that I had Metal Archives, and they put a Cats. I'm like, great, yeah. I love Cats, and I went and I didn't realize I had a Metal Archives, and I looked it up, and they called me post black metal. And I got so mad that I wrote a death metal album that weekend.
Excellent.
And then that was kind of therapeutic. And then when you guys reviewed the other week when you reviewed our split and you said it again, I felt like I was a little more calm now. So I think I'm ready to talk about it without feeling like I need to blood eagle you and the death metal guy.
Well, please send us the death metal album. But I mean, so post black metal, yeah, that can mean a lot of things. I don't really like using that term for almost anything that I like, because I also agree it's a horrible genre. It converges with the worst of what gets called atmospheric black metal. However, it does have this sort of has this kind of pervasive influence on all sorts of stuff. You could even say that the newer Druid sounds kind of is really good, but sounds kind of post-black.
Sure.
But yeah, no, I like what you're saying about the old sense of atmospheric black metal, because that had some solidity to it and some black metal to it. The aggressive parts in your music are quite aggressive. And the folk parts are authentic in a way that is not usually the case with a lot of post-blackish stuff.
I think at its best, atmospheric black metal kind of captures a term I believe I heard you use on an earlier podcast, which was like full spectrum black metal. That I think black metal is underrated in terms of like we can have things that are very harsh and blast beats and screaming and that, but also have these sort of quieter moments, more beautiful moments, and all of that being acceptable. And I think like that's probably another reason why, like when I kind of figured out what he wanted to do, my perspective was that the atmospheric black metal is a place where you could do all of that. You could do like the harsh stuff and the quieter, more introspective stuff, and it all fit.
Interesting. That makes sense. So yeah, you're interested in like, for you, yeah. So it's like a different kind of spectrum. When we say full spectrum, I think we often mean like a spectrum between sort of when we talk about full spectrum, we usually mean stuff that's just really loud and aggressive, but has a spectrum of harmonic qualities. So like mood. So think about like the early Emperor stuff, where it'll cut from like sort of super turbo goblin stuff to like wizard throwing skulls at people, you know.
And so by the way, In the Night Slide Eclipse was probably another album I should have mentioned as like a formative album.
Yeah, so and I mean, you know, consistent with what you said, a lot of those full spectrum records are like extraordinarily atmospheric, right? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, that and some of them have quiet parts on them.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. That makes a lot of sense. Do you ever listen to Lunar Aurora, or is that?
So they were one of those bands that people assumed that I was influenced by, and I hadn't heard them. And then somebody played them for me, and I really like them now. And they're more recent. I'm not as familiar, but I've really been enjoying what I've heard. And they're also a group that ranges from having like pretty lo-fi, like rough sounding stuff to some more, you know, kind of beautiful sounding soundscapes.
Yeah, so they were the first band I heard called atmospheric black metal, I think, pretty much.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, it's good company.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. So, Charlie, so what about for you? I imagine you start from a somewhat different spot.
I took the most backwards path to find black metal. Let me tell you that. I think I stumbled upon like what black metal actually was in like 2015.
Mm-hmm. Jesus.
Yeah. So I'm a very late bloomer, but the second I like found it almost, I say almost immediately, but like it almost immediately vibed with me. And I say almost because I think this happens like with a lot of people that get into black metal. It's like the first time you hear it, you're like, ugh, shit's disgusting. What the fuck? Who would listen to this? And then like maybe like a week or like a month later, you come back and you're like, oh shit, I get it now. And that happened to me with Drowning the Lights. I think it was From the Abyss album.
Mm-hmm.
And I think specifically about it was the vocals. And, like, everything else sounded, like, great to me. But the vocals, I was just like, oh, my gosh, this is ghastly. And then, like, yeah. And then, like, a month later, I was like, oh, I get it now. Okay, yeah, this is fucking fire. And then, yeah. But as far as, like, influences...
Wait, before that, can we just say what got you to Drowning the Light as your starting point? I have some hunches, but how did you get to, like...
That's not necessarily my starting point, but that's, like, the first, like, actual black metal band that I heard. But I think the very first thing that was, like, necessarily black metal was, I think it's Autumn's Kingdom, and it was, like, a self-titled EP or an album. And it was really just, like, really reverby metal. And I was like, this is fucking amazing. And then, like, I looked up more on it, and I found out it's, like, actually black metal. I was like, wait, some of this stuff I've heard before is called black metal.
So were you navigating YouTube, and were you already listening to metal at that point?
Yeah, so I started listening to metal when I was, like, 11 or 12 or something. And I think it was specifically, like, Disturbed, like, Down with the Sickness, I think. Yeah. And so I also came from a very sheltered family. And I had no fucking clue what that was at that point. And I was like, what the fuck is this? And
I had a somewhat similar experience.
Yeah. Yeah, so, like, since then, it's just kind of been sort of like a backwards path to black metal. I started with, you know, like, Disturbed, and then there were bands like, let me think. There's sort of, like, post-punk stuff, like metalcore stuff. Yeah, I'm about to piss off a lot of people that listen to your podcast.
Is it too late to cancel the split?
I hate to break this to you, but yeah, there's, like, metalcore stuff, then, like, death metal stuff, and then there's deathcore stuff. And around 2013, when I started, like, experimenting with those synths, I got into, like, Viking culture. And that's when I started listening to, like, Viking metal. There was a like, let me think, like, King of Asgard and I think Elevite. There was this other band. They're kind of niche, but they basically, like, broke my mind when I was like 15 or 16. They're called Krampus, and they do, like, sort of like a metalcore kind of folk metal, but, like, I still listen to it to this day, and I fucking love it. Like, it's almost like Elevite, if you've heard them.
I have. So you basically knew what Viking metal was, but not what black metal was, and then you backed your way into it.
Not until folk metal. That's when, like, that influence started, like, getting into the picture. Around, like, 2014 or 15, something around there.
Dude, so this is fascinating. So I guess we do have to talk about. I guess we do have to talk about the age thing because I don't want to out you on air, but I do. Charlie may be a Zoomer.
Possibly.
And you know,
as the fact check it.
Yeah, and you know, as the death metal guy has asked in some of his interviews, you know, there's this interesting generational thing where it's like the dude, you know, we're always curious about how dudes younger than us, right, are like how they're getting into this music, how they're relating to it and accessing it, because it's in some ways similar, you know. That process of gradually getting crazier and crazier is one way or another is going to be familiar to most people. But it's different. So like, are you like checking out stuff on YouTube, or what's your main navigation mechanism? And just to make it clear, it's not like we were trading tapes with it's not like we were trading tapes in people with people in Mongolia or whatever, right? We were using like Blogspot and shit.
Yeah. I think it's.
I wish I was trading tapes with people in Mongolia. Sounds awesome.
Yeah, can you elaborate on that? But yeah, I think it's mostly been YouTube in the past. The only thing is I sort of don't really listen to black metal anymore. And I have a whole spiel about it. It's not just black metal, it's metal in general. It's very like not often when I like find an album or something that I really like that's metal. But that's a whole different story, and we can talk about that if we want. But yeah, it's mostly been YouTube where I've been finding stuff, and not Bandcamp or anything. I think I found a lot of stuff on iTunes back in the day too. Mm-hmm. But YouTube is where I like actually started finding black metal, because it's kind of hard to find that in like mainstream websites like iTunes or whatever the fuck else.
Yeah. Okay. Wait. So now, I mean, since you said that, I think we should just talk about it now, because otherwise we'll forget. I know I've known people who are very, very serious about making black metal who, at a certain point, kind of lose interest in hearing most other people's versions of it, at least for a while. But what is it? What is it for you?
I personally just think metal's sort of stagnant nowadays, and it's kind of hard to find something that's like inspiring or good to listen to. And I'm not saying that about everything. There's a good album like every year or so, and I'm just like, this is fucking amazing. Like just a couple days ago I found who was it? I think it's Praise the Plague, and they just released an album like a couple weeks ago, and I was like, this is the best thing I've heard all year. I think it's Gate of Oblivion or something like that. I can't remember what it's called exactly, but like that's probably like my favorite thing that I've heard this year.
The Obsidian Gate looks like.
Yes.
Black metal band with a dark and devouring doom attitude. Okay, I'll bookmark this.
Oh yeah, you should definitely look that up. But yeah, so I don't know. It's like I'm still necessarily a metalhead, and I still listen to shit like all the time, but it's not primarily what I listen to anymore. I listen to like a shitload of different genres, and that sort of started happening in like 2016, I think, where I started exploring like different genres a little bit like more hardcore. But like before that, it's mostly just been metal stuff, like Viking metal, folk metal, like metalcore stuff and shit like that.
Got any current obsessions, genre-wise or band-wise?
You're gonna hate me for this.
Don't worry, I already do.
Yeah, I know.
It was the Illuvity name drop.
Yeah, you already said something about this in the and what lies beneath its shade podcast. Yeah. So I'm a really big fan of like synthwave stuff, obviously, and like retro wave stuff. And there's this certain group that I've been listening to about a year now that I just like really fucking like. They're called the Midnight, and it's like, it's almost like 80s themed like electronic music, and like I don't know what it is about it, but there's just something really special to it, in my opinion.
All right, yeah, no, well, the death metal guy actually likes some synthwave stuff.
Oh, good.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes some sense though. So that's part of the more sort of like pulsing electronic thing going on in music. Yeah. Okay, interesting. So, maybe we'll come back to that one way or another. But for now, let us foray on to or forge ahead to the talking about the split that just came out. So, there was a split, and there is a split. It's called When the Last Forest Has Died. It is currently available on the Moulderyawn Bandcamp. Is it also on Robes of Snow? Does Robes of Snow have its own Bandcamp?
Robes of Snow does have its own Bandcamp.
Does it also have the split?
It does.
All right. So on both Bandcamps, the split is available. All tracks by both bands, which is nice. Not all bands do that. And it is called When the Last Forest Has Died, and there's a physical release that will be coming out right around when this episode will come out.
Nice.
On Old Mill, obviously. So you, I think, mostly been in touch with Charlie prior to this. You told me that the split is intensely collaborative.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't even know if split would be like. To me, split implies like two artists. They may or may not know each other. I record my songs, you record your songs. We put it together, and that certainly wasn't the experience. Where he did vocals for Woodsman's Walk, and did a whole bunch of stuff on Winter Knell, and like so there's just, and then the final song on the album is, I would say, like a pretty even 50-50 split. So I guess it's we when we were talking about all the different permutations, and some of them were like logistical concerns, but it was like the album is so collaborative, it would we couldn't think of a good way to do it, and short of starting another band camp, and who has time for that, like it just made, I think it made sense for both of us to like put all the songs together, because the album just works thematically that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, word. So, so the full collaboration, the last track, is The First Weeping Willow. That's more of a sort of acoustic ambient thing?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it's really like, I think I personally consider it like a duet between, our two styles, like the synths and Damian's acoustic stuff.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Would you say the synths are almost your primary influence? Or primary instrument, Charlie?
Absolutely. And there's a whole thing to it, but it would take a lot of explaining because I'm an autist.
Well, I mean, yeah, well, that's our stock in trade. So maybe we'll come back to that but that makes sense with the synthwave thing. And then, okay, so interesting. But okay, so although you have this, you would almost say you're synth focused. And although, Damian also has this strong component of acoustic music Americana in his own stuff. On this record, the death metal guy and I got the impression that both of you have converged a little more towards straight up black metal or straight up atmospheric black metal.
I think, like you mentioned it in the review just a few weeks ago, I think what you said was we leaned in, on each other. I think we kind of did that, sort of passively, and we didn't, even realize it necessarily. Which I think we did, yeah.
So, Damian, how would you say, looking back on it, how would you say maybe your playing or approach was different on this one? Or, what how would you describe the sort of way that might have happened?
So from a songwriting perspective, the way we did this is really different than I typically do. Lyrics are usually one of the, or sort of maybe the concept of the song. I'll start a song usually with a very loose concept in mind. I'll write a song, and then the lyrics will come afterwards. But I would almost if we lived near each other, it would almost make sense to describe it like we storyboarded the album. We talked about the story that we were trying to tell, and then the kind of ideas and what would happen, and then we wrote things around that. So having said that, we kind of had an idea and a little bit of story of what we wanted to tell, and so I think then that's probably where sort of that influenced as the way the story came about. I wrote the music to the general framework or the idea of it rather than which is reverse of my typical creative process. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, okay, so there's a really sort of elaborate poetic description on the Bandcamp, which to be honest, yours truly totally missed when we were doing the initial review. I'll give the listeners a initial taste of it, but then I'd like to ask you guys to talk about it.
Sure.
So one thing is that Moulderyawn has a strong narrative component to his other releases, like From Whence the Woods, or and What Lie 'Neath Its Shade, and they've often been released with texts to accompany them by Old Mill. But so with this one, the first paragraph is, "And in an abrupt awakening, the green wizard of tale sluggishly rises to greet the spring, yet he is met with silence. The sun does not rudely blind him awake. The leaves do not whisper in the breeze, the birds do not sing in their choir song, there is only stillness. Patchworks of frost lattice the ground before him." All right, so how did this narrative emerge between you guys?
So, do you want to take this one?
Oh, no. I think it's funnier when you say it.
Okay. So Damian initially messaged me on Instagram. Actually, no, it was Reese. He said, you should do a split with Ribs of Snow, and I was like, okay. And at the time, I was in the middle of writing And What Lie 'Neath Its Shade, so I was like, I'll get around to it eventually. And eventually we did. And we were like, hey, so Reese was like, let's do a split, so you want to think of like a concept for one, and this guy over here is like, oh yeah, that sounds cool, you know, we could do a split, that sounds great. And little did I know, he actually had been messaging Reese the whole time, like, hey, you should tell Charlie to do a split with me. Hey, you should tell Charlie to do a split with me. Hey, you should tell Charlie to do a split with me. And yeah, so that happened, and we almost immediately like figured out the concept for the split, and we were like, yeah, so like, what if it's about like the last forest on Earth that just dies or some shit? And I was like, that sounds great. And everything else just like flowed out like perfectly. I was like, this is going to be incredibly easy to work on,
and incredibly depressing.
Mm-hmm.
I am well versed in psychological manipulation, so I was like, you know, like I looked at this, I'm like, okay, how can I manipulate this guy to get him? Because, you know, I heard Moulderyawn and I really like his music, so I thought, how can I get this guy to do a split with me?
Yeah, totally. You shouldn't ask him straightforward.
Where's the fun in that? So and then, you know, being a fan of his music, I realized like there was a narrative component. So I thought, okay, like you know, if I'm gonna approach him, that I should probably have some idea in mind, and it was also a good creative challenge for me as well. I typically like my creative process isn't that linear, and I don't think as much narratively. So, and I enjoyed that sort of about the imagination that he puts on display in his music. So it was a fun thing for me too, and that probably also factors into the leaning in part, that I was like, you know, being aware of how like his process, like, it would be fun for me to try to think about it a little bit more from that narrative perspective. And you know, my approach maybe has a little more of the philosophical or the religious bent to it, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. And so like, you know, I had some ideas, but then him and I started kicking ideas back and forth, and it flowed pretty freely.
All right, nice. So you guys were not, I take it, friends before this?
No, I would say that this split was sort of like the thing that made us friends, actually.
Yeah.
And I think we do like consider each other friends.
Yeah. I mean, he's met my wife. We've hung out. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you guys live close enough that you can chill.
Absolutely not.
Sure. Just separated by about 900 miles.
Oh, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Oh, so you mean like on Zoom and shit?
Yeah. Oh no, no. Go ahead, Charlie.
Yeah.
Well,
so,
that might all be too much detail. We don't need to go into all that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
He was very adventurous, and he drove to Pennsylvania, and it was awesome. The end.
Yes, that's a condensed version. Yes.
Fucking cool. All right. So okay. So there's the combined story emerges that way. Any important? So since you took point on this initially, Damian, any central things about this story that you'd want to get across to I'm not saying like you have to tell the whole thing for our listeners, because they should go read the stuff on the Bandcamp and obviously buy the split and whatnot, but like any central things that you'd like to talk about here?
I mean, no, and you know, I again had approached it from a more general perspective, and Charlie's great with some of those details, but one of the things I do think is sort of worth mentioning is I was also at the time had just finished my album The Fog and the Tide, and where I was also like global warming and shit like that freaks me out, and so I was working through some of that on that album, but you know, still something that was on my mind when him and I first started talking about it. And Charlie, I'm gonna let, because you were the Chernobyl stuff. I'll let you talk about it, but like I would say that like rather than it started out just probably more of the gloom and doom, but I do think it had a different and sort of more beautiful ending. As you know, while we're working on the album, I'd say probably about halfway through we sort of changed the narrative a little bit, and you can talk about that part.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Yeah. So how did it transform through the collaboration?
So, obviously, initially what we decided on was, like, a story about, like, the last forest that's died, obviously. And, just working on it, like, through... When did we start this? Like, was it winter? Like, December sometime, I think?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. So we've been working on this for a while. So it took, time for the story to evolve in that many months or whatever. But initially it was about like the last forest that's dying, and it's sort of like the deified look at like the forest and like what it's going through as it's dying. And it sort of like made sense at the time that winter comes to like put the forest to sleep.
Okay.
And yeah. And we took that and we kind of worked around with it. And that was initially what it was. And I'd say about halfway through it, when I was working on the painting for the cover, I was watching this like one of those like National Geographic documentaries or whatever. And it was about the exclusion zone in Chernobyl right now, like like what's going on with it like very recently. And I could actually like link that to you if you want to watch it eventually. But yeah. So I was watching that, and there was one key like thing.
The exclusion zone, for our listeners, probably being the area that is irradiated that we're not allowed to go in.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And there's one key thing that the narrator said while I was painting, and I was just like, holy shit, like, this is, like, pretty much what we're writing about right now. So after that, there was, like, this sort of, like, this inspiration on the back end about Chernobyl. And it's basically, like, the exclusion zone is forcing, like, humanity out of it because of the radiation and shit. But the nature and the wildlife inside the exclusion zone is thriving. Well, allegedly, that's what some of the reports are saying. Some of them are saying it's not actually thriving, but who knows? But regardless, if it is or not, it's like it's still a proud statement that like even though there's like this massive disaster that happened that killed like hundreds of people and like infected a shitload more, nature's still kicking and it's coming back, even though like that shit happened. So we took that and we said this is kind of like a really good like point to make about this album, even though there's a lot of like doom and gloom after life's died. It's just a point that life is a part, like it's in cycle with death. You can't have life without death, and you can't have death without life, basically.
And I think
that's awesome. I just want to interject that's great. I really love finding a way to look at the way shit is going to. You look clearly at the way the processes are playing out, and without rosy-eyed glasses, and then you also try to look at it affirmatively. That's great. So, Damian, what were you going to say?
Well, sure. And I was going to say, so we have and I think that's probably when the idea for the first Weeping Willow came in. The other four songs, they're very kind of harsh sonically and very purposefully. The last song is something that is more gentle and beautiful to kind of represent that change of like after all this stuff has happened, but then to represent that concept. I think like he had talked to me about that documentary, and as like that idea kicked around, like that's why that song, I think, or at least in my mind, like we did very thoughtful. That was probably the song we spent the most time on, despite the fact that it's probably the shortest song on the album, was because for me it was very important to get that song to sort of serve as a symbolic representation of that hope after all the rest of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so is the hope somehow come out of the way that winter arrives to put the forest to sleep?
Well, so I guess I was thinking more of hope as being like that like that nature will find not to be like cliched guy and be like nature will find a way, but nature will find a way and life will persist despite whatever horrible things we do to the world, like nature will find a way to survive, is something that is very comforting to me in wrestling with all the kind of shit that's going on with this world. So that's what I was talking about most specifically.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just being really literal and saying, you're imagining global warming as a concern. You imagine some sort of winter finally coming to put things to sleep. Then everything melts.
I wish. Oh yeah, no, I mean I'm pro winter, so.
Yeah.
I'm also pro winter, just for the record.
All right, well, get ready to get canceled.
Huh?
Let's move. I guess we've covered the essential thematics. Also, I suppose we should talk about something more mundane now, but not mundane, also important, just like more details. I mean, an important compositional thing, right, in this, right, is that you guys had, not only were you sharing like ideas and collaborating closely musically, but you also shared a drummer.
That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's very open-minded of you.
Open-minded people. Yeah.
And I actually have a statement from the drummer that I would like to read. So this is from CJ Yakub, and he would like to say, working with these two has been an absolute pleasure as always. They're both good friends of mine at this point, on top of giving me some incredible music to write over. Once I found out this album was going to be more of a collaboration, I was incredibly excited. Hearing the elements of both bands work together is amazing, considering I love both projects. Also, there's more music in the works for these guys that I'm excited for everyone to hear, as well as my own bands. All three of my projects are either writing or releasing music right now, and I'm very excited to share. I want to thank Aldersop and Damian for being great friends and amazing to work with, as well as the Terminus podcast for being cool dudes and reviewing the split. Take care, friends.
Oh, thanks, CJ.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, if I could, just briefly mention, CJ was someone, a great guy. Just also just sort of messaged me, and I heard him. He said, "Oh, I'm a drummer. I could play." And I had heard people, people have approached me with that. I'm like, yeah, right. So I wrote a song, thinking, I'm going to write this song. There's no way this kid's going to be able to play it. I'm going to purposely make it too fast. It's going to be too hard. It's going to be too long. So I wrote the song, Spring Brings Pestilence, and this fucking kid recorded it. It's the second song on A Star Is Lake. So it was basically, I was like trolling him, because it was just like, all right, this kid's not going to be able to do it. And like the technical precision with which he did it, I was like, oh shit. And so that's actually how this, I up until that point, I had played drums on a shitty electronic drum set. But then I heard him play, and I was like, well, I can't play my own drums anymore after hearing that. And so, and despite the stereotypes that someone has about a drummer, he's actually a really great guy. And he was someone, I knew that he was a fan of Moulderyawn. So I was like, when Charlie and I were first talking about the split, I knew that I had to get him on my songs just because I know he would really enjoy working on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. So his main band is called Amun, right?
That's right.
Mm-hmm. And they also just released an album very recently.
Yes.
Cool. Yes. No. Yeah.
Check
He was saying. So yeah, that record is it's kind of that record is The City, and
yes,
it's quite long and ambitious. I checked it out. It's more kind of like big melodic death metal that sort of moves between electronic and folk stuff.
Interesting. That's a pretty good description. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so. What?
No, I was going to say, certainly a different sound than, Robes of Snow and Moulderyawn.
It is. Yeah. It's definitely fresh. Like, in regards to what I was saying about metal being kind of stagnant nowadays, that is something that I would consider is, like, very fresh.
Yeah, I think it's written. I think that stuff sounds like it's written towards big stages.
Yeah.
Like that would play well to big audiences.
Probably.
It's okay, so yeah, and obviously that's Amun, AMUN, and is on Bandcamp, of course. Experimental folk black metal for the apocalypse. Okay, that sounds pretty close. So you guys and just to clarify, this is the first time CJ's played for you, Charlie, but Damian has worked with him before.
Yeah.
All right. Awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, like we said on the show, the drumming is fucking sick. Very powerful.
He's incredible.
He fucking killed it. Like, holy shit, man.
Yes. How did that, like, was there sort of any, like, playing off and in relation to him? How did you lay down the tracks? Did you do, like, did you just record your final shit over click tracks or something and send it to him? Or did you get to lay down your stuff over drum tracks?
I actually wrote out my drums, like, to where I was happy with them, like how I usually would with Moulderyawn. And at some point, I was either talking to Damian or CJ or someone, and they're like, you should just put CJ on your half of the split. And I was like, fuck, that's a good idea. And like Damian just mentioned, it's like I can't have anyone else on my drums again because, like, it's too fucking good. But I basically wrote out my drums, and then I sent them to CJ, and then he basically dubbed it, but, you know, did his thing. Like, he added his own characteristics over the drum tracks.
Okay, got it. And then the guitars were already with the drums you'd written out.
Yeah, I basically sent him the whole track without drums, and then with drums so he could hear them. Yeah. And then he just wrote the whole thing out.
Same.
Cool, yeah. Cool you gave that freedom. What are the odds of this becoming an actual band that just merges the two projects?
Unlikely.
Robes of Yawn.
Nice. I mean, you know, certainly as Robes of Yawn is a pretty good name. You know, Charlie and I have very different creative processes. But having said that, I'm now pestering him to be on any of the million albums I'm about to put out. You know, especially after this process, and just enjoyed getting to know him as a person. It was like, you know, I'm sure there'll be continued collaboration. It might be a while before, I would imagine, before we would do something more structured like this again.
Yeah.
I don't mean to speak for you, Charlie. So.
No, it's fine. I'm used to it. Anyways, no, but he's already asked me to do some extra stuff for his Ropes of Snow stuff, and I've already said yes, and you can look forward to that as well.
All right, awesome. So yeah, just more ongoing collaboration, but you guys both have to remain, sort of Sylvan hermits for understandable reasons.
Yes, pretty much. But we've also kind of kicked the idea around that, as you mentioned, Moulderyawn has like a very strong narrative to it, and the fact that we both put this split out together or collaborative album, we've kind of made the joke that we've been like Snyderversed, and that we're both tied into each other's lore now.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So you could take that with a grain of salt if you want that to be like your narrative for Moulderyawn or Robes of Snow or whatever. It's like in its own separate universe where, you know, that happens.
Got it. So by Snyderverse, you might need to explain Snyder. I think I catch your drift, but you might need to explain that for people.
Or the MCU or whatever you want to say.
There was the Justice League movie that came out, and then it was originally done by Zack Snyder, but then, you know, unfortunately, I think his daughter committed suicide, and he had to step away from the film, and the guy who did the Marvel movie stepped in, but didn't do a good job, and then HBO, I don't even know what I'm talking about here, HBO then gave them the money to go back and, like, refilm some of it and reintegrate it to, like, a longer thing that has more narrative cohesion and kind of, like, molds the different movies that were there together.
Okay, so it's like a connected universe movie thing, kind of like like the Marvel. It's like this one is like with DC, but there's also the and all one director, but there's also the Marvel Comics universe.
Yeah,
I'm not I'm not a comic books dude, so I might have gotten half of that wrong.
Yeah, me neither.
No, me neither. Disavow. The Marvel movies are you know, god awful, but it's but I the idea of having this kind of fluidity in that kind of open-ended, fluid creative approach in places where it matters and is not all about generating meaningless plot for blockbusters, that seems like a good idea.
Yeah, just delete all the stuff I said about the Snyderverse and just put that clip of what you just said. That's good. Yeah,
that's great.
It's you can use that as your blurb for the next one.
Nice.
But yeah, no, that's really awesome. So, yeah, you're part of each other's lore. I mean, Aldersop literally is kind of a character, right?
Yes, he's basically all of Moulderyawn is based around his experiences, and I have like, if you get me started on it, I won't shut up about it. So we should probably just stop there.
Okay, maybe another interview. Actually, no, we'll come back to it. But yeah, so you're gonna have to figure out how to write Damian in as a character. You're gonna have to give him a cool name.
Old Man Winter.
Oh,
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
there we go.
Yeah.
All right.
When I first heard of Robes of Snow, the first thing I pictured was Old Man Winter, and he just had like an extremely long like coat that's made out of snow that just drags along the ground.
Cool. That's pretty prophetic or perceptive, because your stage name, Damian, is Damian Winter, right?
That's correct. Mm-hmm.
All right, and that's very fitting. That's a sign that things are syncing up in a kind of faded way. What about the cover? I sort of like this sort of like whizzed past me when you said it, and then I was like, oh shit, I got to ask him about that. You painted it, Charlie.
I did, and it's technically like the first painting I've ever done, but I've done like shitty paintings in like art class in like middle school or some shit, but this is technically like the first canvas painting that I've ever done, and I personally think I did an okay job with it.
Fucking nailed it. I assumed you'd been drawing. I assumed you'd been drawing before. Okay, but you moved it to canvas here, and I mean, yeah, I honestly assumed you guys had done some old school metal sort of a photocopy Viking raid and just taken some like really some really good fantasy art. So this is there actually will be no copyright problems with this when it gets big.
Yeah.
Is this of who I think it's of?
Who do you think it's of?
Gandalf and Radagast.
Oh god, that's a really good representation. As much as I'd like to say yes and thank you for the flattery, it's actually Aldersop and Old Man Winter.
That makes sense too. I see now that you've been mentioning the Old Man Winter thing, I see, the snow is all clustering around the white-robed guy.
Yep.
Right. And Aldersop has a kind of taciturn, gnomish expression.
That's true.
Nice.
He has gone through some shit in this album.
Oh yeah, because the forests are he's kind of a forest spirit dude, and the forests are getting hosed.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll come back to that. And well, actually, this all goes together. Now we're just rolling. So in terms of sort of all that stuff, we were apparently, I mean, this is based on stuff we were talking about earlier, on the show. The Death Metal Guy and I have, and probably I've been the ringleader here, have made a lot of the Lord of the Rings influence and Moulderyawn stuff, right? The sort of connection to the idea of Ents and Ents and things like that, a living, conscious forest. We talked about the last one, and What Lie 'Neath Its Shade, as a record sort of forest black metal written sort of by the forest. We've also said, I guess, several times, to a sort of degree that's become a cliche, that this is clearly the work of someone who has actually really carefully read Lord of the Rings.
Ugh. I have watched the movies, and I have played video games. And I've looked up, like, lore on, like, YouTube and stuff like that. But I've not read the Silmarillion, and I haven't read the books either.
Dude, though, that's like, okay, see, that's super interesting. And that, that's another one of those different approaches to, I mean, I feel like that relates to the stuff about different ways of accessing music, too. clearly you really get something about Lord of the Rings, and you've spent a lot of time thinking about that story, or it's really at least had an influence on your own mental universe. Well, here's the obvious question everyone's going to be asking. If you like it that much, why haven't you read the books?
Because I have ADHD, and I cannot focus for shit. That is the cut and dry version.
Dude, I mean, totally chill. I mean, I have my own version of ADHD. You know, everyone's got their own different streak. But, you know, so yeah, okay, that makes sense. And yeah, they're long-ass books, and they've got some really boring parts where Frodo talks to Sam.
Yeah.
Like,
a lot.
Who cares?
Yeah.
Yeah, like, oh god, be nice to Gollum.
Yeah, every step he takes one step further from home. We get it.
Well, every step he takes one step closer to the edge, and he's about to break. Everything you say. All right. We'll cut that. No, we won't.
The huntsman never sings when is born to slay, because all the things they've seen have made them mute. But the woodsmen know the words in the winds they have heard. Melodies have been obscured.
All right. So after a quick break, we are continuing our train of thought about the. Well, we were talking about Lord of the Rings before, and about how Charlie's engagement with all that stuff is more film and internet oriented than text oriented. And a similar thing that comes up, with us, where we always talk about Moulderyawn, and I'm sure we can find a way to connect this somehow to Ropes of Snow, is like, when the death metal guy and I were first, reviewing those records and listening to them, it's like video games. I showed Moulderyawn to my girl the other day. She likes trees, and she really liked it, and she was also like, video games.
Yep.
So what kind of games influence you, or how does gaming in general influence you musically?
I think that is a very big part to Moulderyawn. I've been playing video games since I can remember, basically. Mm-hmm. And I probably can remember back to like the N64 with like Banjo and Kazooie, or I don't know, Legend of Zelda for one, the Ocarina of Time. That's a very big one. I didn't get to play it a whole lot because I was pretty young at the time, but I watched my brother play it quite a bit. And I think if you've played the game, you might already know the where I draw some inspiration, but it's like one of the first areas in Ocarina of Time where you go inside the Great Deku Tree. And I think that's stuck with me like the longest out of any video game I've ever played. And I've just always had a fascination with that. Because you literally go inside this tree that is like the size of a skyscraper, and you're exploring it as if it were a dungeon, which I just found incredibly cool.
That is very cool. And so like you were like playing those games as a little kid. Mm-hmm. Do you have older siblings?
I do. Mm-hmm. I'm actually the youngest of my litter.
A sapling.
Yes.
Yeah, so that makes a lot of sense, because Zelda, for people who played it when they were older, it sort of had this inherently kind of childlike, whimsical thing about it. Mm-hmm. But that seemed that way to me when my friends were playing it in, middle school or when I was 10. But you encountered it when you were like 4.
Yeah, something like that. That's probably the right age, actually.
That would have been very powerful. Yeah, and that would have been a very powerful way to encounter that stuff.
And same thing for like all of the N64 games. There's actually in Banjo-Kazooie, I think there were 2, but on the first one, there was this certain level where you're in this like sort of valley, and there's a massive tree in the middle. And like throughout the game, you have to go back to that level, and it's like a different season each time you go. Ooh. And I have a very, very strong connection with when you go back to that tree, and it's the autumn section. Mm-hmm. And it also has like a different like ambience with like the music there too. And like there's always been something about like old fashioned video games, especially like with any kind of like autumn vibe, that's always stuck with me. And actually, originally when I first heard like black metal for the first time, it was stuff like Autumn's Kingdom or Druk's Autumn's Aurora, which I actually heard those in the summer, but I almost immediately got that nostalgia that I got for like, old N64 games like that, which, it's very powerful, and you can definitely see it in like Moulderyawn stuff.
Yeah, those games are, those like games like Zelda and Banjo-Kazooie or what, or on PlayStation. I think there would be some weird levels of Spyro the Dragon that were like this. They could have these intensely atmospheric kind of just parts that were just really aesthetic.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, so that is very interesting. What drew you to the... So even as a little kid, you were drawn specifically to the autumn mood?
Yeah, I think I've always had like a pretty good connection with autumn too, but like it's something that I didn't really realize I liked until I was like, I don't know, like a teenager or late teens or adolescence or something.
Yeah, so you sort of become conscious of things that have always influenced you one way or another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. So, okay, here's a connection. Damian, I mean, a lot of your releases, maybe almost all of them, right, have been sort of titled and themed around a seasonal cycle, right? Autumn Stag and the Crescent Moon. You got The Frozen Choir. You got A Star Is Lake, about spring, and then Where the Sun Falls, right? Kind of the summary one.
I'm sorry to correct you. So it's funny. I never even thought about where the Sun Falls as like a summer themed album, but it does make sense. Actually, The Fog and the Tide was a specifically written for summer. Yeah, the first like main Robes of Snow releases were all seasonally related.
Cool. So how does there's also one called Gelid Umbra, which I'm not even familiar with.
Oh, a Gelid Umbra. So yeah, like I've always liked the dark ambient winter synth stuff. Is well, you know, so I again, not until embarrassingly recently was I aware of the label of winter synth, but like obviously I liked a lot of music and Winter Raquette and just stuff throughout my life that was the ambient inspired stuff. So I'm sorry, I was went off on a tangent there, but yeah, no, obviously the seasonal stuff is very prominent in all the stuff that I do.
So how do you, so we'll move into talking more about nature stuff. So how does how do you see the seasons as influencing your day-to-day thinking and feeling, or just your music, either one?
I'm sure it won't surprise anybody listening to this that winter is obviously sort of my favorite season, and I know it's like a cliched black metal guy stuff where it's just like I like winter, but I was that is a season that I've always been attached to. I was born in the winter in the middle of a snowstorm, as my mother's fond of telling people, and that's always something that has driven me the most. But I'm also for anyone who follows me on Instagram is probably already bored of me constantly taking pictures of nature hikes. That's just always something that's been a part of my life. So several times a week I try to make an effort to be outside in that way, and so I think that's probably the largest influence on my creative process. I'll spend so I'll go out and explore and hike and get lost and do all those things and then come back, and that often is the inspiration for for any music. And I'm sure that's like a cliched thing that tons of people have come on your podcast before and said, but it's true.
Yeah, I mean, no, that makes sense. So a thing that interests me about your stuff is that rather than attempting to access nature in this kind of sort of epic wilderness register, or this mythological sort of primordial way, your music seems to draw a lot of inspiration from places where you actually walk and go. For instance, your album covers are these photos that I assume maybe you have taken.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, and they're quite beautiful, and they're
Thank you.
The Frozen Choir is really dramatic, and like some of them you can tell have this cool DIY quality to them. Others, the Frozen Choir one, it's just like that. It could just be, that's a that has some of the epic sweep to it. But others, like Autumn Stag and the Crescent Moon, right, is just you can tell just a really well taken, really, a beautiful, highly atmospheric photo from someone's walk. What led you to decide to do that?
Well, again, I come from a family that is very was always encouraging of, we would go take walks and go to parks and do things like that. And my father is very interested in photography. When I was younger, we were always pulling over on the side of the road because he wanted to take a picture of something. And so that's obviously something, and especially as I get older, I'm more interested in, and just taking pictures of that. And when I started Robes of Snow, I was like, probably like a lot of one-man black metal acts. It was like the very DIY attitude of it's like, well, I can't, I'm not good at photocopying. What did you say earlier? Photocopying
Yeah.
Some
photocopying fantasy art, photocopy Viking raid. Yeah, you just plunder.
Yeah, sure. And I don't have Charlie's artistic skills to paint. I just thought, well, I'm already out here taking pictures, enjoying my time outside. I might as well use that as album art, and that's what I did. And thank you. I wanted to mention about the Frozen Choir. So that's the Pennsylvania Grand Canyon in winter, which was the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Yeah.
What's the Pennsylvania Grand Canyon?
So I'm in Bucks County, and then it's like maybe about a half an hour from Philadelphia, and about 4 hours north, like way up, kind of on the border between New York and other places. It is the Pennsylvania Grand Canyon that looks different than the Grand Canyon when people think about the Grand Canyon. It's obviously not out there, but it's up in the mountains, and in the wintertime it's snowy in the fog there, and it's just absolutely beautiful.
Cool. Yeah, I'm wikiing it now. It is very impressive. Cool. So, I've said before on the show that I think people should start doing things like that more. Because there's a real challenge. I mean, obviously I don't think people should just, we don't want to become like, oh my god, it would be pretentious to put fantasy art on the cover, or don't do thing. Oh wow, it's not cool to go beyond the mundane. You should always be looking over your shoulder, worrying that somebody's gonna think you're pretentious, right? That's not at all where we're coming from. However, for some people, it would make a lot of sense for some people to start exploring this idea of, okay, how does that deeper, more majestic substratum of existence, how does that come into our everyday experience, or how do we seek it out? And to do it with things like life photography or whatever. I guess that would be a way of getting deeper.
Well, and I guess I just wanted to say, of course, depending on where you live, if you go out and you take the time to explore, you maybe within 45 minutes or wherever you live, you might find some place that could be as beautiful as the fantasy art you may be interested in photocopying. And you can experience it for yourself and have a real personal connection. And I know I'm sounding like a hippie right now, but I mean, that's, I guess, part of that thing. And then you could, I think that would deepen, your enjoyment. If you're like a black metal artist or just someone who enjoys listening to black metal, that's something that can, I think, deepen your enjoyment and deepen your connection to that. So yeah, I agree completely.
I agree with that too.
Yeah, so maybe I think I'd be interested in this from both of you then, but I'll bounce it over to Charlie first. So obviously woods important to you. Tell us about you don't have to be specific about names or whatever, but describe for us a place in the woods that's special to you.
A place in the woods, that's a very good one. So I think to start, the debut that I did is very obviously in the heart of the woods at nighttime, and that's something that I've always fantasized about exploring. But it's kind of hard to do that because it's usually pitch black dark. So
headlamp.
Yeah, exactly. But I think there's sort of an amalgamation with the whole quote unquote the Everwood that I'm trying to display through Moulderyawn. And it's I've had insomnia since I was a teenager. So a lot of the time I would explore my streets at night, and there's always been street lanterns all night long. And at some point there was that sort of amalgamation where those street lanterns turned into those woods that I wanted to explore at night, and it became this sort of image in my head where it was just a pitch black forest, but there were also lanterns to light wherever you were walking. And that's probably
God, that's beautiful.
Yeah,
and I can see that in some of your art.
That's the whole premise behind From Whence the Woods, the debut. But obviously, it grows a little bit stronger with each release if you listen to all of them.
Yeah, so I can see that on the From Whence the Woods cover. That is that that's not your is that someone else's art or
No, that's mine. That's a digital painting.
I was gonna say
it looks a little odd.
No, but it looks cool, and it captures that idea then.
Mm-hmm.
Lanterns hung in the woods, dude. That's really cool, and that has, you know what, that kind of well, there's something, you know, fundamentally poetic about that sort of collapsing of two spaces into each other to make this dream place, but also like that seems quite related to the way those kind of aesthetic nature spaces in the video games you like.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I fully agree with that. And it might have been like unintentional at first, but looking back at it, it's like, oh yeah, that's where that came from.
So it's kind of a level.
Yeah, pretty much. The way I've always pictured the Everwood, which I referenced that like so many fucking times in Moulderyawn, it's supposed to be like a completely like separated reality from like everything else, and it's supposed to be very secluded. Like if you've ever played some kind of like linear video game, there's like invisible walls or there's like some kind of like backdrop or some shit that makes you feel kind of secluded, like there's no outside world. And I'm really trying to get that point across while also, you know, allowing whoever's listening to it to be able to wander those woods like eternally and like however far they'd like to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other kind of are there other levels to Moulderyawn, or is it all in the Everwood?
There are, and it goes way too into detail, so it would take me a couple hours to actually describe it all. But yeah, there are quite a few other levels.
Shit, maybe that'll be another interview. Just
if you want, let's do it.
I mean, honestly, that'd be pretty chill. Yeah, just like all the lore to Moulderyawn at once. Like if you're down, that would actually be awesome to do at some point.
I'm honestly so down.
I really think you guys should do it.
I think we should too. That would be so fucking fun. I mean, it'd be a different flavor from the usual metal interview, but so much the better.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. All right. Okay. Cool. Yeah. So Damian, back to you. Like, places near you, again, don't have to name them, but like, or it could be an imaginative space like that, but maybe for you it'd be more to talk about like places where you walk or hike or that are, yeah, let's say nearer to home, not the Pennsylvania Grand Canyon, but any kind, either specific spots or kinds of environments that really appeal to you when you're out nature. And
sure. Well, and for the record, I don't mind mentioning specific spots, because if somebody goes to my Instagram, you know, you'll see it, and you know, Bucks County is a very beautiful place that I'm very appreciative to live near. And imagine now there's a place that Tyler State Park, which is sort of, I guess, like, you know, the park that I go most frequently. It's you know, sort of halfway between where I live and where I work. And you know, so I go there often, and that's actually where I met Charlie, and he called it Middle Earth, and now that's like in my head when I think of it. I mean, you know, it's a beautiful place that's like exactly what you're probably imagining a guy who has an atmospheric black metal project is. You know, it's like it's a forest, but then it also has like hillier parts and open fields, and because, you know, all the seasons are represented well around this part in Pennsylvania. You know, I've spent a lot of time in, and I was actually thinking, it's like, Charlie, if you come up again, we will go there in the middle of the night with lanterns, and we'll give you the full black metal experience.
Please, I'll bring my get up from the music video.
Good. And so, you know, really, I feel like I would probably be here for hours, so I just figured I'd pick that place. But I guess one of the other things that I wanted to say is that the photo for Autumn Stag and the Crescent Moon was taken at a small neighborhood park called Valley Center Park that's like next to a local high school. And so, like, sometimes, right, like, it doesn't have to be this fantastical out in the middle of the wilderness environment to be able to enjoy nature. It's like, you know, it can sometimes just be like a small neighborhood park where you can get away from all the stresses of your life and disengage from civilization in that way to have that experience. And so I think, like, you know, again, I'm really lucky living in Bucks County. There are places in there that, like, have the out in the wilderness vibes, but you don't need to that. I have some good friends that live in Brooklyn, and I spent some time in Prospect Park, which is, like, in the middle of the most civilization-heavy place that's, like, absolutely beautiful and has the same sort of sense of imagination. So, I mean, I think that's the great thing about nature is you can almost go anywhere and be able to have access to it. So sorry to get, like, a preachy, pagan-y soapbox, but, you know, that's just really part of the experience for me.
Also, didn't you dedicate, like, one of your albums to that whole concept that you just explained?
Yeah, it shows. Yeah, it's Whenever the Sun Falls. It is about, like, you don't need to have to, like, and I think that sort of maybe goes to that, like, where idea that you don't have to, like, live out in the wilds to be able to enjoy and appreciate that. Like, even wherever the sun falls is a place that you can, like, have some time to get outside and appreciate. Like, even if you're just, like, looking at the sky and watching the clouds, everybody has that opportunity. So yeah, like, I'm definitely, in that sense, I'm definitely, like, provincial in that way, and, like, you don't have to travel very far. I'm sure wherever you live, you can find somewhere relatively close, assuming you're able to go there and have the means to do that, to be able to enjoy stuff like that. And I think, like, hands down, one of my favorite kind of compliments or messages I get from people is, like, I just started walking recently, and, like, I listen to Robes of Snow when I'm hiking. Is, but, like, one of my favorite I appreciate all the messages I get, but, like, that one really, like, warms my heart. Or I've occasionally got this one, it, like, may have brought a tear to my eye, where someone's like, "Hi, I live in Chile, and I've never seen snow before, but, like, it snowed here for the first time while I was listening to Robes of Snow," and I'm like, thanks for leaving me that message.
That's cult.
Yeah. Yeah, that's, like, very, very beautiful.
Dude, that's awesome. Yeah, there's maybe, you know, some way, you know, like like you were saying about the clouds, right? It's like, in some way, in a way, one of the most, you know, people can often, let the perfect be the enemy of the good in terms of this stuff, like, oh, I can't go camping, or, like, oh, where I live is boring, or whatever. One of the simplest and most important things you can do is just, like, learn to look up.
Absolutely.
Like, I'll, like, be, you know, it used to be a rare thing when I'd see a hawk or a cool bird of prey, but I've always been interested in them. And now I can't not see them. And it's in part because I think they're coming back more to the area I am, but it's definitely also learning to look. And you'll see just, like, you could see, like, a peregrine just, like, bombing after a crow or something, or, like, a vulture swoop over the street, and people just, like, many people just don't see it at all.
Sure. Yeah.
You know, same with clouds, right? Yeah, clouds are fucking cool. So yeah, and in terms of stuff like that, right, as you said, pagan soapbox, there is, however you want to define it, kind of a religious dimension to this stuff, where it's like, you know, the gods or the divine or capital N nature doesn't have to be showing up out there, and you don't have to go put on a robe and dance around in the
oh boy,
exactly, dance around in the whatever to access it. But
sure.
But like if you're interested in that stuff, it can be and it doesn't have to be this object of nostalgia, like something back then. It can be a part of your daily experience, how you see things.
Absolutely. It can be a right now.
It's very true.
Yeah, so let's bounce it over to Charlie. What's your right now?
Huh? Wait, what?
You murmured, you were sort of like, oh, it's very true about it being a right now. So how is your kind of... you know, we've generally characterized what you're doing as pagan black metal because, I don't know, you know, it's about sort of animated trees. And and it seems to come from some, profound, a sense that nature isn't just a thing for us to steward or find ourselves in or whatever, but nature is a thing that has some claims on us.
That is true. So I have sort of a different view on paganism, and I might get lit up by hashtag pagans of Instagram, but it's so the way I incorporated it into Moulderyawn and possibly like my life too, but it's more of like a deified look at nature, just a little bit, and you take all like the literal sense of like staple pagan gods or whatever, like Thor or Odin or something like that, and it's more like you take all of those forces at once that you can like read about in like mythology and stuff, and you just stick it in the forest, and you take it from the forest's like as if the forest was like the character in all those stories and stuff. And what I'm more getting at is like in mythology, there's not just like gods that are just straight up good or straight up bad or whatever, especially in like maybe like Greek or Norse mythology.
Yes, yeah, and then in like robust paganism,
yes,
there's not a good or evil concept.
Yeah, each god they talk about, they're just like us. None of them are inherently good and none of them are inherently bad. They just kind of do shit. And a lot of it's chaotic for most of the part because, they're gods and they have a lot of power to their name. But, fuck, where was I going with that? I forgot.
Well, they just kind of do shit. I like that a lot. That's, they do. In the same way that nature just kind of does shit.
Exactly. And so, so basically it's like, I don't like the whole stigma that, like, nature's this giving and like all loving creature and we have to respect it and stuff. Well, yeah, you can respect it, but it's also like what I just mentioned, it can also be chaotic and it's not there to like comfort you. Like you have to know when to like when you're in danger and shit like that when you're out in the woods. And I talked about that a little bit in What Lie 'Neath Its Shade. There's like a certain lyric like I'm every tree, every sproutling, every leaf on the wind and stuff like that. And it's trying to like draw together all the forces of the forest. And it's like there can be good in there. Like you can find food like berries or some shit, but you can also find berries that'll fucking kill you. It's both sides of the story at once. Like, there's bad shit out there and there's good shit in there. So you can take it for what it is.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, nature is... Well, to me, like, you say, oh, that might be unorthodox paganism or whatever, but to me it's like, okay, sounds like you fucking get it. Certainly maybe more than many people who would call themselves pagans and would be more interested in the symbolic paraphernalia, right?
Yeah.
In the gods or in the robes. I think really like, nature is power, but it's also full of clashing powers. Interacting with each other in different ways. What you said about it taps into what you were saying about not just good or bad or good or evil. It taps into the older and original sense of evil before it gets moralized, where it's just like, what is evil? Well, it's like things that do
Christianized.
bad. Yeah, exactly. Before it gets Christianized. What is evil? Things that do bad things to you. Like, what is... So it's like, you've heard the phrase, right? Oh, I don't want to do you any evil.
Yeah.
Or like an evil influence.
And it doesn't make any sense. Like, that's arbitrary.
Well, oh no, but I'm talking about like an older sense of the word where it means like I don't want to do you harm. or
Yeah,
like,
yeah, okay.
or there was an evil influence on the air, or whatever, or something harmful. Like, whereas like the good is like, you know, in some way beneficial, or like good to do, or whatever, and the evil is like in some way harmful. But so like, if you wanted to say that in the Norse myths, the Jotuns or whatever are a source of evil, it means that they represent this kind of unbounded kind of certain kinds of hostile natural forces totally beyond the human that can be destructive to the people from whose perspective the myth is told.
Yeah. No, that's a perfect analogy, actually, because, you know, for the Jotuns, whatever the fuck they're doing, they don't think they're evil. They think they're just, you know, doing what's good for them. And it's the same for each side of the story.
I was going to say, I think from many people's perspective, and by the way, this will be my 4-hour podcast that we can do separately. Like,
Okay.
Right. Like, I think many people have suggested that, like, in the Norse and the Germanic versions of that the Aesir are actually the bad guys. But I think, the proper story is there are no bad guys. Like, these are tales that have symbolic value that are intended to teach the audience that, like, nature will sometimes do things that benefit you, and sometimes will do things that benefit themselves at your expense. And those stories, rather than having like a specific moral point or a specific benevolent point, were created to teach you to survive, rather than to suggest sort of like a moral outcome.
Yeah, you know, you could think of the Aesir, or, you know, I mean, with the Greeks, it's the pantheon gets so kind of humanized, that literary, that it's almost hard to make out exactly. You know, you have to read the Iliad to try to figure out exactly what the gods really were. But, like, you know, in a similar way in, you know, primordial Greek religion or whatever, right? It's like,
Sure.
You could think of the gods as powers of nature insofar as they come into the human world, right? Not like insofar as we can control them, but insofar as we can be empowered by those impulses, or take direction from them, or, you know, become storm-like and sort of frenzied like Odin or whatever.
Well, yeah, and by the way, and go ahead.
Oh, just the thing I was going to say is just like also, but the point is, so even though, you know, maybe the mortals feel some alignment to or fealty with the Aesir, like the Aesir are their, you know, the lords above their own lords or whatever, it's like, that, you know, the gods can fuck you over. You know, like, sure, the giants might be out there as kind of generally hostile forces, but the gods can fuck you over too all the time.
Yeah. And by the way, like, seriously, be like, okay, Professor Robes, shut up now. I don't want to take up too much of the time about it. But yeah, I mean, and I think even, like, it's interesting how a lot of modern perspective has shaped the way people view paganism. Now, like, I guess my entry point is more to the, like, Germanic or the Norse part, but it's interesting then how even, like, people will talk about, like, Thor as if he is the god of thunder, as if that's a thing, but that's, you know, but that's not true. Like there is not, like, the idea that the Norse gods that people typically think of as embodying specific aspects of nature don't appear in the original literary sources that they came from. That's usually in comparison to the, like, people are like, well, you know, Zeus, or, you know, the Greek and the Roman and all that different stuff. It's like specifically about this, and in, like, the study of comparative religion, that they would try to then compare Odin to Zeus and Thor to different people, and then, like, end up having them suggest that they embody specific things. Doesn't sort of match out to the actual practice. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
So, what would you mean? So, like, I certainly agree with what you mean about, like, say, God of Thunder, because that seems to imply there's this very late, kind of alienated way of looking at the gods as if they are distinct from the powers they embody, right? As if they're like control, like, oh, Thor's in charge of the thunder.
Right.
You know, Poseidon's in charge of the sea.
Right.
Whereas, you know, in an original sense of that, it's like, where is the god? Well, the god is in the storm, the god's in the eagle, the god's in the wave.
And I think that varies by the particular type of paganism. Like, you know, we by the time we live, like, by the time we're in 2021 and trying to understand, it's been funneled through many different belief systems. So, right, as I understand, right, like, Poseidon has those specific domains, and, like, the Norse gods, like, when you look at the traditional sources that people use to, like, source historical information on them, like, there isn't, it's like, there may be a point where Thor is in particular associated with thunder.
Yep.
But by no means, at least by that I can recall offhand, does he actually wield it or prescribe any authority over it in the same way that, like, Loki doesn't manifest it. He's just like a dude who's like, hey, look over there. Like, his sort of his level of trickery isn't as evolved as it can. I mean, there was that one time he convinced, like, Thor to cross-dress so he can get his hammer back. Like, there is, like, some of that there.
He fucked a horse.
Yeah, well, he changed his gender, and he
Oh,
changed
right.
both his.
He was fucked by a horse.
Hey,
Yes,
we're
I
in
was gonna say.
2021. People can do whatever they want.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, my dude wanted to get fucked, so not only did he change his gender, he turned into an animal. Like, that shit was cool back then, and it's cool now. But, like, yeah, these rigid ideas that people have about, like, what that could represent. But I also think at the end of the day, and Charlie, this probably ties into what you're saying, like, some people believe that there is, like, a literal Odin who's like a god,
flesh and blood,
a guy running around out there.
Yeah.
Right. When, like, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to people who hold that belief, but, I mean, that's, like, certainly not the way I see it. And I think there is a lot of paganism that will use that more as a, like, this is a story or a symbol that will represent some individual aspect of nature. I also think it's sort of arrogant for us to assume that, like, as a human beings, the divine manifestation would have, like, a human consciousness. Seems like it seems like a little sort of egocentric. And again, that's the way we understand the world, so it makes sense that some of those characters would have that way. But, like, in a lot of the stories, the Norse gods experience hardships due to weather, people die, bad things happen, they age, there's struggles with that, they're tricked and betrayed and have a lot of human emotions. Like, so that's useful to us, and to the extent to which that we're humans. It would seem weird to view aspects of nature as having personalities, because nature has, like, a bigger job to balance the ecosystem and keep us from destroying it. It doesn't, like, I guess that's what I'm saying is, I suppose that's a very Christianized way of viewing, like, divinity. It's like somebody with an ego, and I'm not trying to take shots at Christians either, but, like, viewing it as, like, somebody with an ego and having those motivations outside of sustaining itself.
Yeah.
Well,
I was gonna say something in there, and that's actually a good point, because it kind of takes away from, them quote unquote being gods if we, project our humanity onto them, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Oh, well, this, Odin, he's the wanderer, so he just wanders the woods, and so I don't see how.
No.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. I mean, obviously, I think about all this shit all the time too, so I've got ideas. But it's your interview, bro. Roll.
Yeah, I'll just finish it up. Like, how do you put, like, human traits on a god that's counterintuitive?
Yeah, no, I definitely hear what you mean. I mean, like, it's like the idea of, certainly also that notion that I liked what you were saying, Damian, about, the gods come from, when we look at what is a god, well, it's from, like, 50 different sources written at different times in different villages. And so really what it is certain related traits, associations, powers sort of accrue around them. It's not like this is the god of that, right? It's and about the humanizing. Like, I certainly agree with you about that, but I would maybe even go further and say the whole notion that gods are about, sort of humanizing nature. Well, it's like like, in some way, right, sure, it's putting a human face on it, it's anthropomorphizing it, it's telling stories about it, but, like, and maybe, but yeah, like, the way people conceive it now is very much like the Christian model of, like, okay, let's give nature a consciousness and a mind, and let's try to make it more familiar by making it look like us.
Right.
But on the other hand, I think you could also see it the other way, and I think this is how it actually worked in some way, whereas, like, by looking at stuff out there and making it like a person, you're sort of recognizing its agency in relation to you and its claim over you. And then if you look at the way the gods act, which is always, like, batshit insane people,
Oh, yeah.
what you're capturing is, in fact, the way that, like, whatever patterns, whatever, whether you want to call it, like, patterns or consciousnesses or, you know, forms nature takes, they're very different from human ones. So, like, the way the gods are driven by wild passions and impulses and are constantly, you know, say, constantly interfering with each other, constantly acting in ways that are sort of inscrutable to regular human motive. That can all be a way, that whole notion of people acting not like people can be a whole way of capturing this sort of, the way that nature is kind of beyond us.
It's kind of like, maybe, like, if whenever people were, like, writing that shit down back in ye olden days, it's probably like them projecting how they would see the gods to act, like, you know, based on what they'd think. So, like, if someone act, like, overzealous about something, they'd be like, well, you know, this certain god, he's very greedy because, you know, deep down that person's actually kind of greedy, and, you know, maybe they feel remorse about it or something like that, or just, like, anything in that, you know, genre or that vein.
Well, right, and you know, I obviously tend to reference, you know, in my songs, or I guess just like the way I look at the world, some more sort of the Norse or Germanic stuff, but I, and not to directly rip off an interview I heard with Under Selvik from Vardruna, but right, he described it a certain way that, like, I couldn't think of a better way to describe it, where he's just like, look, this is really about nature. There's just like a Norse wrapping to it, where it's like, on this outer level, here's the specific myth, and obviously, like, people approach that, and that's fine. You know, whether you approach that from, like, myths if you're from parts of Africa or different parts of Europe, or
the Aztecs.
Or South America, or the Middle East, or you know, or the indigenous people in America. Everybody, you know, a lot of places, or I'm assuming pretty much close to all places, have some form of, like, older pagan myths that all eventually get to the same place, which is, like, what is nature? What is our relationship to it? What does our relationship to us tell us about ourselves? And, you know, and the world. So, like, the symbols involved in it are like we could view the myths or even the gods as symbols or tools to understand something deeper. By the way, this is like something that people in an extreme metal podcast are gonna be interested in listening to?
I would hope so.
Okay.
I mean, like, certainly a large subsection thereof. Do you know how many things in my feed are just, like, sick nature photos? Also some mediocre nature photos.
Sure.
But, you know, like, you gotta start somewhere.
Sure. But, you know, okay, good. I just wanted to make sure I'm not...
Or, you know, pagan stuff, right? There's lots of pagan stuff.
Well, and I find, and again, I'm not trying to take shots, you know, at anybody, and obviously people have different paths, but, like, I've learned that in the black metal scene, people that call themselves pagans maybe don't have, like, and you know, everyone's understanding is different. I'm sure there are people who, I'm probably, whether it's musical genres or religion or anything, I'm not particularly dogmatic about anything. And like, you know, my interests, like, don't fit into sort of, you know, I don't fit into these clear categories, but like, it took me a while to realize that, like, people will talk about it, but I don't think they're really interested in it, or, like, people will just do it because, like, they think it's promotion for their album, or they're actually just racist Christians and they're using, like, they're using that as some kind of symbol or whatever it might be. I don't want to just be sitting here, like, having like a paganism lecture, people like shut the fuck up and talk about blast beats, you know?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's fair. I mean, I think, like, I think a lot of people who follow the show are pretty serious about whatever their spiritual persuasion is. And a lot of the people in the more underground bands. But I hear what you mean, that for a lot of people, it can just, especially for more mainstream bands and also for all kinds of, like, meaningless one-man projects and whatnot, it can just be a theme, right? Or like,
a fashion
yeah,
scheme.
of course.
Whatever the underground version of that. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think everyone would agree on that. Also, disclaimer to all the pagans out there. I don't think I strictly agree with the idea of just God's natural forces. I do kind of think of them as something beyond nature per se and all that, but that's just about, that's getting into the weeds. I think talking about them in terms of nature is really important, and really important in terms of making sense of, trying to make sense of trying to make sense of the religion and trying to do it in a way that brings it just beyond, let's say these stories about these moral paradigms or these sorts of things about cultural inheritance or whatever.
Well, I think I'm actually like in the same boat with you right there. Like there is something a little bit like above our heads that we don't necessarily understand. Like the inner workings or whatever.
Well, and I was also even thinking that, like, paganism sort of is a term that incorporates a diverse belief set, and ranging from people like who are closer to atheism to people who literally believe that, like, Odin is real and you can talk to him. Like, there's obviously a subset of that, depending on the area where you're from, the different things that have influenced that, or it's in turn subsequent influence by other religions like Christianity or Buddhism or any of the Abrahamic religion. It's like where most of what we know about Norse paganism comes from Christian Iceland, or the previous Germanic version of it from the Romans, who then in turn were translated by, like, when the Romans became Christians. So we're probably not, and I know people are probably going to get angry at this, and I guess this is going to get me canceled, but, like, a lot of the original information about that is lost or is subjective, and I think that's okay. Like, we were designed to have creativity and as imagination to take what information we do have and then make something new from it that causes a personal connection to our lives, or something that reflects more about the modern world that we live in. And I know a lot of pagans, like, such as myself, like, I will embrace science and the discussion of evolution, and certainly as it pertains to psychology and all these other things, fit well within that, because it's acceptable for something to change as long as you don't look at it too dogmatically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I minored in philosophy, so I'm sorry about that.
I have some experience with that myself. Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. I mean, as far as, like, like what we can know about it, there's really good archaeological stuff now, and it's often being integrated with anthropology and comparative religion. And so it's, like, I would say it's remarkable how much we can reconstruct about it. But, somebody who's really good is a guy named Neil Price, if any of our listeners are interested in him. He's a scholar, but he thinks, he's able to think like a madman in a way that allows him to do really cool sort of reconstructive stuff about Viking religion. I think he's got a more sort of he's got a kind of general audiences book out now that I can't remember what it's called.
I will definitely check him out.
Dude, his lectures on YouTube are fucking sick too. He will tell you so many things about, like there's one about, like, Viking funerals.
Perfect.
Sure. Awesome. I'd also recommend, since we're talking about, like, awesome, accessible people, Dr. Jackson Crawford, is another guy who has a lot of good, like, good stuff, and able to break down pretty complex stuff in a pretty easy to understand way. Since we're just talking about
that's a YouTuber guy, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
But yeah, a guy who has a PhD and whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's cool. But yeah, and the other thing apropos of that, I totally agree with your idea about, like, it doesn't need to be whatever we think we can or can't know about it. It doesn't need to be, and really shouldn't ultimately be about slavishly reconstructing old stuff. I think even the people who put on robes would, and strongly believe in robustly anthropomorphic deities. Even they would say. Even they would probably agree to a version of that, but I think, the idea that, pagan religion in 3000 BC was very different from what it was in 1000, and these things, and the whole idea that, like, God's nature, gods change, gods get blended into each other, gods have children.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then then it gets changed because there's a large part of spirituality that's inherently relational. Like what is your relationship with nature, and then ultimately what of that experience, whether it's the stories or your connection to the natural world, like, is changed by your perspective within your relationship, with it. And like, ultimately that's what it's about for me. And again, for some people, maybe that they literally believe that they are, like, you can call Odin on the phone or DM him or whatever, and that's fine. But, like,
dude,
Odin wants to know your location.
Dude, that's such a good track title for some crazy project. Like, sort of, DM the Terrifier.
Also,
to
sort of add on to that, so, like, in regards to, like, nature and paganism, so we've always had nature, and that's sort of like, like a force that we can take into account with, like, all of this. Like, I don't know how much nature has changed over, thousands of years, but it's something that we've always had. So that's personally, like, my basis for it, and that's why I kind of, like, when I think of, like, nature or paganism, it's like, it's the same thing to me. Like, having, respect for the earth, and also, like, enough, like, fear to not know, or to not do, like, stupid shit in the woods, like setting shit on fire, or, like, fucking chasing a bear down or something.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I feel like I could talk about this for hours, so, I don't want to ramble on too much, but I think it's a good topic, and not one that I often hear discussed on a granular level in the black metal scene. Or the metal scene in general. It's like people talk about it, like, sort of superficially, or they'll, like, post a picture of Travis Fimmel looking like Ragnar Lothbrok, but, like, won't go
to them. It's like cosplaying.
Sure. Like, which is fine. Like, I like.
Yeah, it's fine.
Like, certain things that I enjoy just, like, as a TV show or, as a movie, so it's fine. I don't think... I'm not so elitist that it's like, you have to be true pagan in order to listen to Robes of Snow. You can be from...
You have to be true. That's just for me. All right, you keep going.
But yeah, I mean, I don't care. Anyone of any background is welcome to listen to Robes of Snow, and it's fine by me.
Yeah.
Like... That I'm not particularly exclusionary about that, but I just think, like, it's cool, and I've heard you talk about it in other podcasts too, that you'll give it a little more space than other people will give it, which I think is great. Like, because I'm sure people who are interested in black metal probably may be more likely to be drawn to stuff like that, and then like, it gives them an outlet to, like, maybe learn about it or get different perspectives, or, like, get angry and disagree with me, which is also fine too. Like that, or just have a chance to, like, explore those ideas more. So I think it's cool that you're willing to, like, in a podcast like this, be able to devote some time to that. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Also,
thanks, bud. I appreciate it. That means a lot. But yeah, what were you gonna say?
I sort of cracked a joke about, like, Vikings or whatever, and how, like, that TV show kind of blew up paganism, I guess, when it came out. And I do owe a bit of homage to it because, that was kind of inspirational, but with most things, you kind of have to take it with a grain of salt. And that's I say that about everything. Like, you can't take things as seriously as like most people do.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, the show is not widely historically accurate. It's a good. It was good entertainment, and I enjoyed it.
There are some moments of remarkable historical accuracy on it, and where it's like, oh, they were like reading academic papers or something, or they were like, and then there are other moments where it's like, what the fuck?
Right. Rollo, Ragnar might not be real, and Rollo certainly wasn't his brother, but good show.
Yeah. No, I agree. You know, I mean that's you know, the Vikings thing. Yeah, take it for what it's worth. I think it was a great, you know, it was a pretty damn good show for a few seasons, and I kind
of fell off the wagon at like season 3 or 4 or something, but it was really good, like what I've seen.
Yeah, I mean, you know, and stuff like that, or you know, if stuff like that, or like you were saying, stuff like fucking N64 games can feed back into a, you know, all of that stuff's important insofar as it can, you know, ignite imagination. Right?
Yeah,
absolutely.
All right, so things. Any final things that you guys want to communicate to the Terminus legions?
That's a good question.
Or any future stuff for the bands.
Buy our merch so we can sell out and then abandon creating music. One thing that me and Damian actually talked about was so you've referenced Old Mill quite a bit with me and Damian stuff, and I think at some point you've said that we're like Old Mill acts, and that's kind of true, but it's also like the way Old Mill does their stuff is they kind of just release stuff on a whim, and it's sort of like we kind of have our own things going, and then Old Mill's like, let's put that out, and we're like, sure, that sounds great. And he also has like this honor system, kind of. It's like we don't have any contracts or anything. It's just like, cool, that sounds good. That the cover art looks good. Let's go, and then we put it out.
Yeah, you know, you'd reference that in the review where you're like, you know, sort of about the record label thing. And I think, you know, obviously what that term means in 2021 certainly is different unless you're, like, signed to Earache or, you know, Nuclear Assault or whatever. Like you know what I mean? Like I think with the advent of a lot of stuff like Bandcamp, like, I sort of wonder what the role of traditional labels is. Now... And I, you know, made that joke about, like, thinking that Reese was trolling me about tapes, but, like, Charlie, you spoke on that honor part, and, like, I've aligned myself with him because, like, he's done sort of things by honor, and you can tell that it's, like, a smaller label run by a person who really cares about that music, and, like, who's been very transparent and honorable in a lot of stuff. And, you know, Reese and I look at the world in very different ways, and, like, have different ideas about things, but he's been, like, upfront, honest, and very clear. And so, yeah, like, we're not, like, signed in a way that's exclusive, and I've...
Right. You're not literally Old Mill House bands, and you have a kind of... The label is... You do a release, and the label will do hard copy on an ad hoc basis.
Well, sure, and I've also done stuff with other great things like Wearingham Records, and I do have other things... you know, coming out, but Reese has been great. He's helped me in things, in a lot of different things. I'm not very good at social media. I don't you know, I sort of like don't understand things from a scene perspective. I'm like, I spend all my time wandering around in the woods. I don't have an understanding about that, and he's helped from everything from art design to bouncing ideas off of, and all stuff like that. So yeah, I really like working with Old Mill. We're not signed to any degree exclusively. I wouldn't sign exclusively with anyone. I choose to work with him because he's been great and straightforward up front and worked on that, and that's great.
Yeah, that's actually like the whole reason that I when he was like, let's put your album out on a tape, and I was like, sure, 'cause like I already knew him. I already knew like the amount of work that he puts into stuff, and like I already like had trust with him, so that's why that ended up happening.
Sure. So you said other things that you wanted to mention. I'm nervous about saying this out loud, but I'm going to say it anyway. So starting with When the Last Forest Has Died, I have a release scheduled for every major pagan holiday between now and next August. So, yes. So that's all the seasonal ones and the middle ones. So, for example, we just like the first harvest we just put out. When the Last Forest Has Died, I'm releasing another collaboration album with a great artist who's not even a black metal artist, Running Fox, Lost Foal. We're putting out an album, Ghost Lake, that's on the first, that's on the first day of autumn. I have a release coming out that is on Halloween. I have another release coming out on Yule, the first day of winter. So it's a lot of stuff planned that will be dropping every sort of holiday for that. So I don't, we'll have to do a whole separate podcast talking about all this stuff, but those albums are either done or some various stages of being done, and some of them are black metal albums, and some of them are folk albums, and some of them are dark ambient / winter synth albums, but will all be released accordingly is the plan. We'll see. Who knows if that will actually happen, but we'll see.
Hell yeah. All right. And so Charlie, let's roll things out on does Aldersop have any final words for our listeners?
Remember, children, to stay true and burn down churches.